have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart. I have overcome the world.
Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good.
And I thought it would be informative, but I hope as well inspiring. Now, the book of the Revelation begins with this vision of the resurrected Christ, the Son of Man, and it's evocative of the prophecies from Daniel, but also Jesus' most common title for himself. And this Son of Man is robed in white attire. He's a gold sash across his chest, eyes ablaze. He's described as the one who died and lives forevermore. And this vision and all the components of it really inform the letters to the 7 churches mentioned in the Revelation to inspire, to correct, but also to empower them to overcome. Now, the next church, we looked at Ephesus a couple days ago. The next church in our list is Smyrna. And Smyrna is really the next city in the trade and mail routes through Asia Minor. It kind of goes through like this. We started with Ephesus, and Smyrna is 35 miles to the north. It's modern day Izmir in Turkey. And Smyrna was, the next major city after Ephesus. It rivaled Ephesus in size and importance. It was chosen as the site for the temple to the Emperor Tiberius. So again, it had a lot of social, cultural, political significance. Think of it like Los Angeles, not New York, not DC, but an importance all its own. And like LA, it was a hard place for Christians to live, as the values of the surrounding culture were way out of phase with the biblical approach to life, and the pressures to conform were fierce. So that being the context, let me read from Revelation chapter 2, beginning in verse 8. And the angel of the church in Smyrna, and to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, the words of the first and the last who died and came to life. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but a synagogue of Satan. We'll talk about that phrase in just a little bit. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested. And for 10 days, 10 days, not a literal 10 days, but 10 is a fullness, completion of a time. For 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who conquers or overcomes will not be hurt by the second death. Now, unlike today, Christians in Roman society were a minority, and they certainly weren't a protected minority from Roman authorities. Christian resistance to worship the emperor, to burn incense, meant they faced the threat of torture and even execution. And there were persecution by a Jewish group there in the city as well. And the Jewish group there in Smyrna was an influential group, important for social and economic activity. And the group of Jews there, the persecution they inflicted on the Christians was so intense that Christ refers to them as a synagogue of Satan. Now, to our modern ears, our modern sensibilities, we might respond to that as anti-Semitism, or think of it as anti-Semitic. but that would be a misunderstanding of what's being said here. Christ himself, a Jew, is speaking to the Apostle John, a Jew, and talking about a particular group, not the whole Jewish people, but a particular group within the city, perhaps a synagogue, a true synagogue, that has set themselves against Christians and the church so fiercely that they're actually advancing the goals of Satan. That's what Jesus is saying there. You can think of it like this. Now, as Christians, we feel the outrage when a group like the Westboro Baptist protests at military funerals, proclaiming things like God hates homosexuals, although using far more crass language. And then we feel the sting when they are pointed out as a hateful Christian group. And I would say it would serve us well to remember it's appropriate for others to point out the hatefulness of some activities done by people who are Christians, without feeling like all Christians are being pointed out as hateful. Now, the Jewish people are not hated by God. They clearly have a special place in God's thinking and in his plan. But this particular group in this particular city were way out of bounds, and they were critiqued by Christ for their intense persecution of Christians. Now, as it relates to the suffering experienced by the Christians in Smyrna, we might expect to hear Jesus say, hey, it's hard, but help's on the way. It's not, it's going to be over soon. And that's the way we tend to talk about the gospel. We tend to say the gospel, it makes your life better, right? So believe Jesus and things will be better. And in the effort to spread the gospel in the past century, many preachers took a very American way of spreading the gospel. They sold and marketed it. The merchants of the gospel might say, there might be hard times today, but tomorrow there's going to be sunny skies. So that's why you should believe in Jesus. And here's the thing that Christ says to the church in Smyrna. You are suffering now, but guess what? More is on the way. Endure. Endure. Be faithful. The message of God's redemption in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus is not a triumphalistic message, at least not for this life. We will come to experience some measure of healing this life through the work of the Holy Spirit, through the nature of the gospel, but we're not going to experience ultimate healing in this life. We will experience suffering, and some Christians will suffer greatly. Some will even die. Certainly that's what we're seeing in persecutions in Africa and the Middle East and in Asia. And to God and to these people, God says, endure. Endure. And we might ask, how? How can we endure such threats, such suffering? Because Jesus is the one who died and came to life and lives forevermore. He has the power over death. Yes, we may face death, and that's a hard thing for me to even say, because I'm not living in a territory where I'm facing death on a daily basis. But it is true that God's going to redeem even death, and if we die for the sake of Christ, that will be redeemed, because Jesus is the power over death. How can we endure the threat of death? Because he is the one who died and came to life. We all are going to face death. I will face it. You will face it. Our children will face it. Whether it comes early or late, we will face that first death. But what about judgment? What about the second death of eternal punishment? Jesus says this: the one who conquers, the one who overcomes, will not be hurt by the second death. Overcoming is not a triumphalistic vision. It's the one who endures. Suffering is on the way, but be faithful. So the question I have for you is, what are you suffering today? What are you enduring today? Is it economic hardship because of the lockdowns? Is it racial oppression, prejudice? Is it crippling anxiety or some other mental health issue that just has tremendous pain and suffering into your life. You know, we all need to keep working at pushing back the dark, as one Christian singer put it. And I think there's reason to believe that we will experience some progress in our lives. I love that quote by Martin Luther King Jr., and actually he's quoting other pastors when he talks about we have to realize that the arc of the moral universe is long, which means it takes time, but it bends towards justice. It bends towards redemption and healing. It does. So we may experience some of it in our lives, but we have to prepare our hearts and minds to endure, knowing that our ultimate victory is in the one who died and rose again to live forevermore. We're going to share in that victory in our own resurrection, when all things will be put right, when all things, as Jesus says much later in the Revelation, behold, I make all things new. And it should give us courage and strength to endure and to persevere and to keep pushing against the dark, even if we don't experience ultimate healing in this life. He encourages us to overcome, and to overcome by doing good. So I want to leave you with the benediction that's really the theme for this series from Romans 12:21. Do not overcome evil. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Be strong, be safe. I love you. I'm going to look to see if there are any comments, questions that people have today. Let me see here. So I'm just refreshing my screen to see if there are comments. All right. Okay, I don't see any comments right now, but again, if you do have comments, if you watch this later, I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have. So glad you watched this video. Again, Lord is with you, and He is the one who died and lives forevermore. He's with you.
I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart. I have overcome the world.
Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil